Oh yeah, then some yeah, some.
Okay, so Geshe says, before I forget, as I usually do, I would like to welcome you everyone to this class. So welcome everyone. Okay, so today we come back into our class of mental factors. So of course we had a big break in between because it was like the winter break. There were other teachings happening, and we have some material that we have not finished. So we have some remaining material and we need to come back. So we have said that we have this presentation of the 51 mental factors. We have said that we break up those 51 mental factors into different groups, different categories. But the main thing we have explained and we need to understand is what is the purpose? Like, what is the reason that we want to study this material? The reason why we study this is because we want to recognize negative afflictions, negative states of mind, right? If you don't know it, you will not recognize it as being negative. So first of all is to recognize what is negative, but also we want to be aware of what is a virtue state of mind and when we generate it. Okay, so ultimately, once we recognize the negative and the virtues, basically what we want to do is we want to keep a tally every day, right? And compare how much negative I produce, how much negative I generate in my mind, as opposed to how much virtues and positive I generate within my mind. Okay. It's not enough just to recognize like how much or what is negative and what is positive. We have to make a step further. Once you recognize what is negative, you recognize it so that you can make the effort to stop it. You want to make the effort to abandon it. Also, once you recognize what is virtuous and what is positive, you want to be fully aware when you generate it, how you generate it, and how can you become more familiar with generating it with continuity, with greater force, and so forth. Ultimately, the goal of this is that we will abandon negativity, we will become totally familiar with virtue, and in this way, we will obtain the state of liberation and the state of omniscience. It is very important to recognize afflictions. We are at the stage here where we are discussing afflictions. And the thing is that if we ask the question, who or what is causing us harm in cyclic existence, in samsara, since beginningless time, the answer to that is afflictions. So here we want to look at the list of the root afflictions and the secondary or the proximate afflictions. These are the things that disturb us. These are the things that makes us agitate. They make us unhappy. They destroy our peace of mind, not just as individuals, but also we see that they cause all this trouble and disharmony in the family, in society, but also between countries. So whatever the scale you are looking at, this is what is causing all the trouble. Okay, so we, as we say, we're discussing here afflictions. We have the 6 root afflictions. Then we have the group of the 20 proximate afflictions. And then at the very end, we have a small category of the 4 changeable mental factors. All right, but before we do all this, it's very important that we establish our motivation, we adjust the motivation, and the way that we do this is by reciting the verse for refuge and bodhicitta and Ganteng Lagema. So we will do this. All right, so we needed to look at the category of the 20 proximate afflictions. So first of all, we want to look at the name of this group, of this category. Obviously, we have 20 types of mental factors in here, and they're called proximate afflictions. So proximate here, it means they're close to something, they have proximity to something. And the question naturally arises, what are they close to? What they have proximity to? The answer to that is they are proximate to the 6 root afflictions. So we remember we had that category of the 6 root afflictions that had to include things such as attachment, anger, pride, ignorance, doubt, and view. All right, so these are the 6 root afflictions, and now we have 20 proximate or secondary afflictions. Okay, so they are close to the 6 root ones. So the proximate indicates that. And also we need to understand what is an affliction, all right? Because if you don't understand what is an affliction, there's no point of talking about proximate afflictions. So an affliction is a mental factor that if it is present in your mind stream, it makes you, it disturbs your peace, and it makes you unhappy. So if the presence of a mental affliction causes this to you, it means that of a mental factor causes this to you, it means that it is an affliction. So in ordinary colloquial language, everyday language, we often say, oh, this person is my enemy, or let's say the Chinese are the enemy of the Tibetans, and so forth. However, if we go according to Buddha Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, all of those statements are false and incorrect. You could say all of those things are lies. This person out there is not my enemy. The Chinese are not the enemies of the Tibetan. The real enemy is the root and those proximate afflictions, isn't it? But if we don't recognize this, we go along and we carry out our day thinking this is my enemy, this is the external enemy, and so forth. And this creates a lot, because we don't recognize who is the real enemy, this creates a lot of disturbance, a lot of unhappiness, and there are many faults and shortcomings from that. So because we don't recognize it, it is important that we look at this presentation of the 51 mental factors. Now, we say 51 mental factors, but actually this is not an exhaustive list. They're not just 51. There are many more mental factors, but at least this list of mental factors, gives us the main categories to help us recognize these things. So, this talk that we have and we say, oh, this is my enemy, or I am the enemy of this person, and so forth, is totally false. It cannot stand. Actually, the way that we need to train ourselves is to recognize the great kindness of all sentient beings. Don't we have this verse in the 8 verses of mind training that says, by seeing all sentient beings who are more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel, and so forth, right? So we need to train ourselves to recognize that sentient beings are even kinder than the Buddhas, or at least as kind as the Buddhas to us, because they are the basis that upon in relation to which we will be able to amass the accumulation. And beyond that, everything that we need on a daily basis, such as our food, our drink, our accommodation, the house, every type of service is provided by sentient beings, right? So it is, they are so kind to us. So this type of thinking that this is my enemy or I will be the enemy of that one is completely unfounded. So Geshe says, I hope, my hope for this class today is that you will understand the meaning of the word affliction. And it will be something where, it will alert you to the fact, it will make you wake up to the fact, so that you can think, oh, an affliction has arisen in my mind. Oh, another affliction is in my mind. So Geshe says, my hope is, I will repeat this a few times, that you will recognize what is an affliction. So we have already covered the first 10 in this list, and we continue with number 11, that is shameless. So shameless is let's describe it, is having no sense of shame for your own sake due to committing offensive acts. So offensive acts here are acts that do not allow you to get better, do not allow you to improve. So in other words, you engage in negative actions that will make you go from bad to worse. So this is the idea of committing offensive acts. All right. And shamelessness is associated with attachment, with aversion, and with delusion. Okay, so it functions to assist all afflictions and secondary afflictions. So this statement here that says it functions to assist, it means it facilitates, it becomes a condition, it becomes a cause that will bring about, it will encourage, it will enhance all other main and secondary afflictions. So to give you an idea of what it means to assist, right? So first of all, the definition of condition is that which assists, that which facilitates. Okay, so when you have a seed and you want that seed to grow, to germinate, you have the water and the fertilizer who assist, who facilitate the germination of the seed. So similarly here, shamelessness assists the generation of all main and secondary afflictions. And it will just make you go from bad to worse. You will not improve if you have this. So let's look at the actual meaning, perhaps try to give a definition here of shamelessness. Okay, so shamelessness, it means you don't have a sense of shame, all right? So it is really a mental factor where you are not embarrassed by negativity for your own sake. So you're thinking things from your own perspective, for your own sake. And if actually you are embarrassed by that negativity, you will avoid it, isn't it? But if you're not embarrassed by this negativity, it means you will engage it. So, for example, you could be ordained and you're thinking, I am ordained. And for me to drink alcohol, it's something that I would never do. Right? I would be embarrassed to drink alcohol as an ordained person. And because you have that sense of embarrassment, of shame, you avoid that negativity. If you don't have that sense of embarrassment, you'd say, oh, come, who cares? Come whatever, let me drink it. It doesn't matter. So you lack the sense of shame. It means you will engage that negativity. So as you can see here, we are presenting this in terms of two opposite attitudes. One is to have a sense of shame, to have a sense of embarrassment for your own sake. So, for example, when you say, I am ordained, it is not appropriate for me to drink alcohol. I would never drink alcohol. Right? So that means you are avoiding the negativity of drinking alcohol because you have that sense of shame, of embarrassment. But if you don't have this, you have shamelessness, right? So you have the opposite. Having the opposite means you're not embarrassed, you're not ashamed. You say, it doesn't matter what it is, I'm going to drink, come what may. Right? So you can see by presenting the two opposites, hopefully it will become very clear. Here we're talking about the lack of shame. So shamelessness, which is a negative, it's an affliction. It's a proximate affliction. So actually it's very important here to recognize when this type of thoughts or this type of attitude arises within your mind, to recognize when you say, oh no, this is not an activity I would ever engage. This is not appropriate for me. So this is having a sense of shame. So if you're having a thought like this, you should recognize it, like it should register. But also if you have the opposite, which is shamelessness, right? Thinking There's no one around. My friends, my colleagues are not around. No one will see me. There are no witnesses. I could go ahead and do that thing, right? So again, that is negative, because, and also it's incorrect. There's always someone who is witnessing what we're doing. The Buddhas are omniscient, and the law of cause and effect is something which is operating all the time. So we have to consider, even if there's no human around to witness us engaging a negative action, we have to consider the results and the consequences of engaging this and stop ourselves from doing it. So this is practice, actually, to recognize and modify your behavior accordingly. Okay, so we continue with the next one, number 12, is non-embarrassment. So non-embarrassment is not having a sense of shame for the sake of others, right? Due to committing some offensive act that is associated again with attachment, aversion, and delusion. And again, it acts to assist all afflictions and secondary afflictions. So as you see, it's pretty similar to number 11, that was shamelessness, but shamelessness is having no sense of shame for one's own sake. Here is having no sense of shame for the sake of others. If you do have a sense of shame for the sake of others, it means you restrain yourself from offensive, from negative actions, and you're very careful because you say, oh, what would others think if I were to do this, right? What would my parents think if I were to behave this way? What would society think? What would the lamas think about me? What would the deities think about me if I acted in this way? So thinking about others, you have a sense of shame. And that sense of shame makes you become very careful. If you're not careful, if you don't have that sense of shame, you become careless, right? And you don't have a sense of embarrassment. So who cares what they say? I don't care what they think about me. I will do it, all right? So you can see here the opposite of the attitudes, being very careful or being careless, having a sense of embarrassment or lacking embarrassment. So if we want to look at the actual meaning of this, you can say that it is a mental factor not embarrassed by negativity for others' sake. So you lose your conscientiousness and you become careless. So to explain this, if let's say you are coming close to engaging a negative action, but before you actually engage in that negativity, something stops you. You put the brakes on because you have this thought that says to you, well, if I were to do this thing, I would upset and disturb the mind of my teacher, of my deity, of my protectors, and I would disappoint all the deities and protectors, but also other humans, right? And if another person were to be disappointed with me and start saying things about me, such as, oh, this is such a bad, inconsiderate person, I would be so embarrassed to hear that they have formed this opinion for me, right? So if you start having thoughts like this makes you brings over a sense of embarrassment for the sake of others. You say, if I were to behave this way, I would disturb and upset others, the mind of others, and therefore I'm not doing it. And that makes you avoid these negativities. So that makes you be very careful in the way that you behave, isn't it? But if you're lacking that sense of embarrassment, if you don't have that sense of shame, like if I behave in this way, I will disturb them. So what? All right. So that makes you careless, and that actually makes you engage negativity rather than avoid this negativity. Once again, we want to look at the function of non-embarrassment, and the function that it has is that it assists the generation of all types of afflictions. So in other words, it assists, it brings about all types of faults. Okay, so we see that number 11, shamelessness, and number 12, non-embarrassment, are very similar in terms of their nature and in terms of their function. The only difference is that shamelessness has to do you have thoughts in terms of yourself, whilst with non-embarrassment or with embarrassment, you're having thoughts for the sake of others. All right, so both of them, note that they have this function of generating all types of negativities, all types of faults, right? They make you be careless, they make you engage in negative actions. Whilst if you have the opposite of this, which is if you have a sense of shame in terms of yourself, if you have a sense of embarrassment in terms of others, that means you will avoid negativity. It means you will engage in virtuous activities. So very important to recognize when any of these are about to be generated in our mind. So as they are approaching, we should make steps to stop them, to avert them. So actually, number 11, shamelessness, and number 12, non-embarrassment, are two of the, you could say they are the worst of the mental factors. They are the worst because they bring along all types of non-virtuous minds. And they, in this way, they promote, they assist, they increase all type of afflictions. Therefore, we have to recognize them, and we have to be extremely careful. We have to do whatever we can in order to stop them from arising and taking hold in our mind. Because if either shamelessness or non-embarrassment arises in the mind, we know that they would lead us astray. They will make us engage in negativity. Right. So Geshe was saying it's very important to recognize them. You see, we're going through the various mental factors, recognize how they function, recognize how they affect you, and just be aware. And from amongst those mental factors, some are worse than others. Definitely number 11 and number 12 are two of the worst. We continue with the next one. Number 13 is lethargy. So lethargy is inflexibility. It can be inflexibility of body and mind that is associated with delusion. So really it comes under ignorance, delusion, right, in that bigger category. And how does it function? What's its function? It functions to assist all other afflictions and secondary afflictions. So let's explain what we mean here by lethargy. When lethargy comes, we experience heaviness of body and heaviness of mind. It's interesting that we use this term heaviness of mind because the mind is not material and therefore the mind cannot be heavy. However, you understand metaphorically, when we talk about heaviness of the mind, it means that your mind is not alert, it's not elated, it's not clear, it's not happy. So it's something like there's some heaviness, something is bringing the mind down, right? So just as the body can feel very heavy, so when you're very heavy, you're not very flexible. So it's heaviness that brings about inflexibility in terms of body and mind. And of course, it makes you very dull in terms of your focal object of concentration and so forth. Again, lethargy is something that we have to be very careful about, and we should try to avoid it at any cost. As you see here, it is associated with heaviness of body and mind. So heaviness of body is, it's not that suddenly you put on weight, right? It doesn't mean that. It means that it appears as if your body is heavy. Why does your body appears to be heavy all of a sudden? It's actually because there are different impurities that are building up in your body, and that gives you the experience or the appearance of the body having become inflexible and heavy. And this is also affects your cognition, your sharpness, the state of your mind. So you're not sharp and clear and happy. You're actually, the mind becomes quite unhappy when you experience lethargy. And when you have a condition like this actually brings along a lot of illness, right? So these imbalances that we have in the body, various illnesses, they start with lethargy. So lethargy is something that we need to avoid. Okay, so we say here that lethargy is associated with a lot of illness. So we have to understand how lethargy comes about. So first of all, the first stage that we have is sleep. So excessive sleep brings about lethargy. So there's something that we need to say about sleep, that sleep, as we'll see later on, it can be either virtuous or non-virtuous. But if you are sleeping excessively, this brings about this heaviness that comes with lethargy. And the heaviness of lethargy brings about different imbalances in the body that then result in various illnesses, such as, for example, illnesses with your liver and jaundice, like hepatitis, isn't it? So Geshe was saying, I don't know exactly, the details of the medical condition, but it is that impurities build up and block up the circulation of your bile. In the bile, you will have bile imbalance, and then you will get hepatitis. So, and as those things develop, as these states develop, also they support a lot of afflictions in the mind. So it's best to avoid the state of lethargy. So as we say, it begins with excessive sleep. Sleep brings about lethargy, and then lethargy brings about these imbalances in your bile and your liver and so forth. So when you have these imbalances, this affects your digestion. And when your digestion is affected, this is reflected in your complexion. So you lose your good looks as well. So, and you have indigestion, and this actually makes you unhappy, uneasy, unhappy. Then the way that you will verbally express yourself, your speech will be rough and unpleasant to others. And therefore, we can see there are quite a lot of things that come with lethargy. It's definitely something to avoid. So do not think that lethargy is not dangerous. Lethargy is quite dangerous because, as we say, it brings about this decline in your digestion, in your complexion, in your good looks. It makes you heavy, lethargic, and that actually means you lose your aspiration to practice Dharma. So if you have no enthusiasm, if you have no aspiration to practice Dharma, where is this going to lead you? This is going to lead you into non-virtue. And we know what is the result of non-virtue, isn't it? We have, you can end up reborn in the hells, or definitely in the lower migrations. So lethargy can have really bad effects, on a very negative effect. So actually, lethargy is quite scary, isn't it? If you see the way that it works, and the way that it works is like gradually, little by little, it brings about this degradation, isn't it? So first of all, you start feeling a little bit unclear, a little bit heavy with the mind. then the body becomes a little bit heavy. Then there's something, your digestion becomes a little bit slow. Then your complexion and your appearance declines. Then the way that you speak to others becomes a bit more unpleasant and aggressive. Then you start losing your appetite or your inspiration to practice Dharma. And when you go through all those stages of decline and you have no interest in practicing Dharma, what does that mean? It means that you will engage non-virtue. And what will be the result of this non-virtue? The result is lower migrations. But when we get into a rebirth in the hells, for example, who will be there to protect us? And can we actually tolerate, can we bear the suffering there? Because being reborn in the hells, whether it is the hot hells or the cold hells, this is an existence of utter suffering. Like here in the human existence, when the weather gets a little bit hot, immediately what we say is like, oh, I can't bear that heat, turn on the air conditioning. Right. So you deal with this by turning on the air conditioning. But when you end up with a rebirth in the hot hell, there's no AC to turn on. How are you going to tolerate this extreme heat there, right? So the thing is, if we actually stop and think about the function of those afflictions, of those mental factors, it is really scary where they lead us. But currently, we're not afraid of any one of them. We say, oh, yeah, lethargy, what is it? Feeling just a little bit sleepy, what's the big deal? But you have to see where that leads you. If you stop and think of it, you would be afraid. You would not want that thing generated affecting your mind.
Yes.
Geshe is saying we don't have a direct reference in the text that says you, as a result of lethargy, you will be reborn in the hells, right? So what we have here in the commentary, it says, due to lethargy, the brightness or the white declines and you will end up in a dark place. So the brightness or the white refers to virtue. Virtue, the white side, will decline. As a result, you will end up in a dark place. The dark place here indicates rebirth as an animal, as a hungry ghost, or somewhere in one of the hells, right? So it's not specifically saying verbatim the hells, but Geshe says, I said the hells because this is how I interpret this quotation. But even if you are reborn as a human, if you are in a place where, the place of darkness, where there is no Dharma to practice, it means you will only engage in negative actions. Well, what good is that? Isn't that darkness? Aren't you born in darkness? So actually here we need to stop and reflect how fortunate we are, how positive it is that we are born not in a place of darkness, that we have Dharma, we have met the Dharma, and we can operate in a different way. So we're very fortunate.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, we come to the next one in our list. Number 14 is excitation. So excitation is mental agitation that engages attractive objects. And that is something that is associated with attachment. So when we talk about excitation, it means the mind has become agitated, the mind has become distracted, and this is due to attachment. Okay, so you become distracted, the mind becomes unhappy, the mind becomes agitated, it becomes captivated by some other object. So instead of practicing Dharma, which is what you should be doing, you become distracted because you are attached to another object. So what objects can you be attached to? It could be forms or sounds or taste or tactile objects or smells. right? So anything that is pleasant. So we see a pleasant form, immediately the eyes go there, the mind goes there. This is what we want to do. This is what we want to enjoy. Or food, tasty food, this is what we're thinking about. We are excited, we are attached about this. Or very soft clothes. This is what we want to have. Actually, those 5 objects, the forms, the sounds, the smells, and so forth, they're called the 5 qualities of the 5 desirable qualities in Tibetan. But Geshe was commenting on this, like there's no quality in them. Actually, they become the object of attachment. There's no quality. That's not a good quality. That's actually a minus, it's not a plus. And because we are attached to those things, the mind becomes distracted. And when we discuss the development of calm abiding, we say that in calm abiding, when we try to cultivate it, which is something which is so worthwhile to have, we have 2 main obstacles. One is mental sinking, and the other one is mental excitation. So this is the mental excitation we're talking about. So instead of staying focused, the mind becomes distracted due to affliction, due to attachment. Okay, sometimes you might be distracted from your main practice, your main activity, let's say by doing prostrations or by doing circumambulations. In this case, it is not categorized as the 14th of those secondary mental afflictions, right? Because to be number 14, this excitation, it means that it has to be associated with attachment. You are distracted because you are attached to one of those objects.
Yes,
So
indeed.
we're talking about those 5 objects, the forms, the sounds, the smells, tactile objects, and so forth, right? And we say that their name are the 5 qualities of desire, or of the desire realm. So the reason why we use the term quality here, quality indicating a good quality, is because afflicted individuals in the desire realm consider these objects to be good, to have good qualities. All right. In reality, they don't have good qualities. They distract us. They cause us to be led astray by attachment. Okay, so if that is the case, why during our practice we generate those goddesses and we have those goddesses making offerings of those 5 desirable objects, the forms, the taste, the sounds, the tactile objects? Why do we see purity in this occasion? Because it's good enough for the goddesses. We generate many goddesses and they carry all these offerings, that they make offerings to the Buddhas and the Yidams and so forth. Okay, so here actually we need to explain this point because it might sound like a contradiction. In one case we say, all of this is horrible because only an individual, a contaminated individual who is full of afflictions, see these good qualities in these objects. On one hand, we say this. On the other hand, we generate the goddesses of form, the goddess of sound, the goddess of smell, and they make offerings of these objects, representations of these objects to the Buddhas and the Yidam. So why is it good in one case and not good in the other case? When we have the goddesses and we make offerings, the substance is always blessed. And when the substance is blessed, in the context of Tantra, it means it is transformed from something which is contaminated into something that is totally uncontaminated. So the offerings that are made in this case are blessed, uncontaminated offerings. Whilst in our case, when we deal with, let's say, a beautiful flower, this flower that we deal with is contaminated and becomes something that generates attachment and distracts us. and so forth. Okay, if we look in Lamrim Chenmo, when it explains what is the focal object and what is the aspect of mental excitation, it explains that it is the aspect is mental proliferation due to mental agitation that focuses on attractive objects that entice you. All right, so mental agitation here and mental proliferation. Mental proliferation, it means your mind becomes scattered, right? It goes all over the place. So it becomes scattered, it proliferates because it starts engaging objects that considers to be enticing, attractive. So those forms, the sounds, the smells, the taste, the tactile objects. Okay, and what is the function of mental excitation? Mental excitation actually creates obstacles or interrupts the focal placement of the mind. So focal placement of the mind here refers to calm abiding. When we cultivate calm abiding, we focus the mind on a particular object. And mental excitation is something which interrupts that placement, isn't it? It creates obstacles. So that is quite serious because we know that without obtaining calm abiding, there is no attainment of Buddhahood. So you can see it can cause quite a lot of, it's quite a big obstacle. It causes a lot of trouble. Okay, so we say here that when we have mental excitation, we have proliferation, all right? And we say that it becomes a big obstacle in developing calm abiding because instead of the mind staying with the chosen focal object, instead the mind proliferates, meaning it's scattered all over, it goes somewhere else. So then the question arises, does that mean that we have to stop all movement, all proliferation of the mind? Okay, so in this, we need to understand that we have different types of proliferation. Proliferation means the mind engages something, becomes very active, it follows something. All right. So this can happen due to attachment. If that happens due to attachment and your mind becomes captivated by a beautiful form, a nice sound, a tasty, a good tasty food and so forth, if this is happening due to attachment, and of course, this is something that you need to stop. But there is other proliferation, meaning there are times where the mind becomes excited and follows activities such as, for example, the object of patience, or engaging generosity, or doing prostrations, doing circumambulations, and so forth. In that second case, it's not a bad thing that the mind engages all these different other activities. But if you are if you're doing practice in order to cultivate calm abiding, in the case of calm abiding, you have to be very strict. So in that case, all mental proliferation, whether it is happening due to attachment or whether you start thinking, suddenly I want to do prostrations, or now I want to go out and practice generosity, all of this has to stop. All right. If you're trying to cultivate calm abiding, you have to be very, very strict with the limits that you place. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to stop here for tonight because actually we have to make time for the Tsog offering. And Geshe was saying is that I was very pleased to see everyone gathered today. So everyone seems to be quite happy and smiling.